Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, May 15th, 2024. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm Mo Schwanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And sometimes we ask you what you want to hear on the podcast. Jill, I saw over on Instagram that you did the equivalent of phone a friend yesterday, asking everyone, what do they want to see on the podcast?
Okay, so I genuinely was struggling coming up with stories for the podcast.
It was a quieter news day yesterday, yes.
And there's plenty of things to fill the podcast with. The question is just kind of what angle do you want to go with? And I'm like, you know what? Let me bring it to the people, see what they want. And I got some great answers, some of which the stories are included in this podcast. And the irony is, our two lead stories, our top stories, nobody suggested them or was interested in them.
Well, I suggested them. You suggested them. We conducted our normal process, though we have at least one story in the speed read from the phone a friend you did yesterday.
Yes, there's one story that's going to be in the podcast today about orcas that is only in the podcast because a few people actually had suggested it on Instagram. It was totally not on my radar. And then there were a couple of other stories that people suggested that were already included. And then a couple of people wrote something just along the lines of anything funny or silly so we can have a laugh out loud with you guys. So We shall try. I should note, we don't plan on the laughs, right? They just kind of happen as we go.
Sometimes we think that there's a topic that is of a lighter fare that potentially could get a laugh, but we don't plan the laughs. The laughs happen organically. Jill, one other thing I'll mention today, just because it's crazy to me, just because I didn't realize this, but today is National Chocolate Chip Day, May 15th. But the calendar is full of chocolate days. It turns out there's a chocolate day on July 7th. There's two national chocolate days, October 28th and December 28th. There's an international chocolate day on September 13th. And then you have milk chocolate day, white chocolate day. It's hard to see a week that goes by without a day devoted to chocolate. So just FYI, folks, today is National Chocolate Chip Day, not to be confused with all the other chocolate days out there.
And because this is a news podcast, I will mention that the price of cocoa actually fell a little bit, about 17% this week.
Good chocolate news.
Yes, which is good chocolate news, given that cocoa prices and therefore chocolate prices have been skyrocketing.
You know, the conspiracy theorist in me thinks, Jill, is it a coincidence that the chocolate prices are falling after Easter?
Moshe, I'll let you ponder that one on the premium account.
Join Mo.news Premium for a fuller discussion of chocolate prices and everything else that's on your mind.
Okay, now let's get to some headlines. Starting with some tech news, Google and OpenAI are in a sprint for AI supremacy. What could possibly go wrong?
In a hurry to create supercomputers that think like us. Jill, it's all going to end okay.
A massive healthcare cyber attack at Ascension, which is one of the largest healthcare chains in America, and it had huge ripple effects, including diverting patients to different hospitals and delaying some surgeries. To the Middle East, why the United Nations changed its death tolls of Palestinian women and children killed in Gaza. An update on the Canadian wildfires making the air in the Midwestern United States pretty unhealthy. And a status update on the Baltimore bridge collapse cleanup. Plus, TV bundles are back. Which streamers might be teaming up to potentially save you money?
Cable is back in a different form, everybody.
What came before the Bend and Snap? A Legally Blonde prequel series called Elle is in the works. And I made the mistake of saying to Moshe as I was writing the teases today, give me a quote from Legally Blonde. He's like, not really my thing, Jill.
Jill, I was focused on memorizing lines from old school Wayne's World, Dumb and Dumber during that era.
And then I thought, Jill, use your brain. You've seen Legally Blonde no less than 100 times. So
Wedding
that
Crashers,
was
I
me.
can give you like 20 quotes from Wedding Crashers.
All right, and as promised, the story suggested by some people on Instagram, a yacht has sunk after being rammed by orcas in the Strait of Gibraltar. We'll tell you what's going on. Plus Moshe has On This Day in History.
Jill, some major fast food history on this day in history, and Elmo says hello for the first time.
All right, let's start with some major announcements in the artificial intelligence space. The race for AI is speeding up. Yesterday, Google announced new AI integrations into the search engine and a new AI-powered assistant. Starting this week, Google's AI overviews will generate a summary above the search engine's traditional results for all users. Also this week, OpenAI rolled out its latest AI model, ChatGPT 4.0, and that's O like the letter, aiming to change the landscape of how humans and AI converse. That ChatGPT 4.0, and by the way, that is a lowercase o, it's for Omni. It features a female voice that can answer questions faster than previous generations of voice bots and has a more human tone. Think joking, apologizing, and dealing with interruptions. The announcement comes ahead of a potential deal between OpenAI and Apple to put ChatGPT in iPhones, which could cement the Microsoft-backed company's domination of the space. ChatGPT 4.0 has visual, audio, and text abilities in 50 languages, and it's also going to be free to all users. The AI assistant can read notes or solve math problems through a phone's camera, in addition to detecting the emotion in a person's voice or guide a breathing exercise. I wanted to play this one example. It's from an account called Evolving AI. So this is a dad and his son. The son is a student. He shares his iPad screen with OpenAI's new AI model, and the AI speaks and it helps the student learn in real time. In this case, the student is learning about a math problem involving a triangle. Take a listen.
I'm here with my son, and I'd love you to tutor him on this math problem, but don't give him the answer. You can ask questions and nudge him in the right direction, but I really want to make sure he understands it himself. And he's here in the room, so you can talk to him directly.
Of course, I'd be happy to help. Can you first identify which sides of the triangle are the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse relative to angle alpha?
All right, so I'm pretty sure this is the angle alpha right here, right?
Perfect.
Pretty incredible, Moshe. The caption in the video reads, "The world just changed forever. Every student will now have his own personalized tutor."
Jill, does the AI get progressively angrier if the kid doesn't get it? Because then that would be much more realistic to some parenting and some teaching out there.
Moshe, I don't know, because this ad or example didn't go that far, but we shall see.
Right. I'd like my AI to be more short-tempered. I want my AI to be more patient.
You know what? You probably will be able to adjust the tone that you want the AI to take, and you could, because it seems like you're able to input all of that. OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman tweeted in response to this new big AI announcement, just the word her, H-E-R, appearing to reference that film in 2013 by the same name, where Joaquin Phoenix's character became fascinated with a new operating system, Samantha, that was played by Scarlett Johansson. So Moshe, I'm not sure if you've seen that movie. I did see that movie in the theaters years ago, and I didn't leave thinking we need that. If anything, I felt like it was a warning tale, like a cautionary tale.
Yeah, Jill, I feel like we're going through a process here, and we're, living and breathing AI development in real time. And we'll look back on it 10 years ago being like, at one point they thought AI would do this, and at one point they thought AI could do that. And I think they're going through the motions here and seeing what clicks and what it does well, and what it sort of replaces and what it complements or supplements, right? So interestingly, you mentioned that this newest ChatGPT 4.0 builds off the previous ChatGPT. It is free to all users, but there is still certain technology associated with it that's behind a paywall. So you can subscribe right now for $20 a month, I think it is, for ChatGPT, where you get additional features. You get the much smarter version of ChatGPT.
It's smarter? Like that? How much smarter can it be?
I think that
they say.
OpenAI is trying to figure out ways to make money, so they're going to withhold certain features for the paid tier, right? At the same time, I will tell you, as somebody who's experimented with the paid tier, And, like even a simple, I think I've mentioned this on the pod before. I was like, what are some simple things I can get ChatGPT to use? I was like, all right, can you help me with on this day in history? Find me things that happened on May 15th. And still, with the paid version of ChatGPT, we'll see what 4.0 is like. They'll name something and then I will fact check it and I'll be like, hey, ChatGPT, you got the date wrong. That didn't happen. And then ChatGPT will reply to me, oh, sorry about that. We will correct. And I'm like, because again, this is a real life, you're teaching, AI stuff. And still to this day, like it's not quite there yet. Like I don't trust the facts that I'm getting from ChatGPT. So we'll see, how much of an improvement this ChatGPT 4.0 is.
Right. About a year ago, I tried to get ChatGPT to write the podcast.
Yeah.
And
it's not even close.
And it literally couldn't do news events. It was like, you can't ask me anything that didn't happen at least 3 years ago. So I'm like, okay, well, considering it's a news podcast, that's just definitely not going to be helpful.
Yeah. Well, and that's the news thing. And now I'm telling you about on this day in history where I'm like, okay, tell me what happened on this day any year in history. And it's still like, oh yeah, we got that one wrong. Sorry about that. We'll fix it for next time. I'm like, thank you, ChatGPT.
And the bar is low because when I do on this day in history, I inevitably get the date wrong. Where you're like, Jill, Jill, you're not even in the right month. What happened?
Did you train ChatGPT? Did we just figure it out?
That's the problem. Yes, ChatGPT was training on these day in history.
But in all honesty, clearly there's some stuff that the AI functionality here is doing well. It is replacing certain roles here. We as journalists are still figuring out how we will utilize it, but there's certainly some industries here that have figured out ways to adapt and adopt AI into their processes. And these are not insignificant announcements this week. Google, you mentioned at the top, Google search engine incorporating AI into search results. So Google, used by 2 billion people around the world, the company now centering itself around AI. During an annual developer conference this week, the company launched a new AI assistant called Project Astra. The earlier version of the AI assistant is powered by an upgraded version of Google's Gemini model. We told you about Gemini a while ago. Controversially, it was generating historically inaccurate images, kind of sort of woke images, because you asked to look at a picture of Nazis and it was giving you Black or Native American Nazis or Asian revolutionary soldiers, and so they tried to figure that out. They're now going off of Project Astra here, and what's significant that you mentioned at the top is that when you Google something in the near future, right now when you Google something, it gives you a whole list of links and pages to go to learn more. What the AI functionality will let you do is that when you Google something, that suddenly you'll get all the results on that page. You won't, in some cases, need to go further. You won't need to go click on a news story to learn more about it, or a website, or a cooking page, or whatever it is that you Googled. Now, of course, the concern is, from a bunch of companies, organizations, media platforms, etc. Whoa, where's our traffic going to come from? We depend on search traffic. In fact, there's a whole thing called search engine optimization, right? You try to customize your website in a way where you improve your listing in Google rankings, and then you hope that when people search for certain terms, that they then click on your link. Well, with AI being incorporated into Google, it means, again, you search the term, and it's all available for you on the Google page. You don't need to click anywhere. So this changes the media ecosystem. This changes the advertising ecosystem. This changes the entire way of getting information if AI is incorporated by these platforms. So making these trillion-dollar companies like Google, Meta, etc., Amazon, even bigger, even more powerful, because right now they're platforms that the rest of the ecosystem depends on for traffic. And with AI incorporated, well, what does that mean?
It can't be good. I don't know the answer, but it feels like it can't be good.
It could be convenient, right? Convenient for the consumer, but does it completely change the media? But does it completely change the business and media ecosystem? Absolutely. And so that is, we're still early stages here, but there are huge ramifications for, these huge tech companies utilizing and improving AI technology. And who are we talking about here with some of these AI, right? Microsoft is, a huge backer behind OpenAI, ChatGPT. Google has their own version. Apple's developing its version. Meta's developing its version. So these trillion-dollar tech companies are the leaders here in the AI race.
Have you noticed that if you do a search on Instagram now, it says ask Meta AI anything? It's a different search.
Yeah. It's trying to learn more about you.
I'm not enjoying it, I have to say. I'm finding it like it's sending me text answers.
Yeah.
Instead of just letting me stay in my Instagram ecosystem. If I'm looking for a person, it'll send me like a biography about that person. And I'm like, no, I just want their profile. I want to message them. I guess this is going to be their, but to your point, I guess this is part of their process of figuring out what people are searching for and how to, as you say, train the model.
Yes. We're just training the computers. We're training the future overlords.
All right, switching gears now to the latest cyber attack impacting a major U.S. healthcare system.
Yeah, Joel, we actually got several questions about this over on the Mo.news Premium account yesterday.
Okay, Ascension, which operates 140 hospitals in 19 states, was struck by a cyber attack last week that knocked patient record systems offline and forced medical staff to log care on paper. It is the latest hack to underscore the vulnerability of America's healthcare system to cyber intrusions. The nonprofit chain said it detected the hack last Wednesday and took immediate steps. So right after it happened, emergency crews actually had to divert patients to other hospitals. Staffers had to come up with manual workarounds. Electronic patient charts, which are the core system for the flow of care, were among the systems impacted.
Yeah, for example, nurses were saying they had to talk directly to doctors because they couldn't, oftentimes with patient care in a hospital, someone visits you, someone else comes in an hour later, 2 hours later, et cetera, and they're tracking it all through the medical records. They didn't have access to that, so they all had to find each other, try to get them on the phone to figure out, what's going on with each patient.
Yeah, and the healthcare chain still is working to get all of their systems back up. In addition, the company said that MyChart, a portal for patients to see their records and message providers, was unavailable, along with some phone services and systems for ordering tests, procedures, and medications. Some elective procedures and appointments have been delayed. And it directed patients to bring notes on their symptoms and a list of medications with prescription numbers to appointments.
So they're still trying to get a bunch of the electronic services online right now, most crucially, access to patient electronic healthcare records. Ascension is one of the big 5 health systems in the U.S., as you mentioned. It's headquartered out of St. Louis. It has about $30 billion in revenue every year. And it comes as the government and healthcare officials right now have renewed attention right now to cybersecurity in the wake of the hack we told you about earlier this spring of Change Healthcare. That's the subsidiary of United Health Group that was in charge of processing medical claims nationwide, basically the back-end system that allows doctors to communicate with pharmacies and insurance companies. So the cyber attack and that ensuing outage disrupted operations across the country. Many of you experienced issues because of it at your local pharmacy. In many cases, you had to pay out of pocket because they couldn't communicate with the insurance companies. Your doctors, again, were having trouble calling pharmacies. And so that hack lasted a while there. And the United Health Group chief executive disclosed last month that they paid $22 million to the hackers in Bitcoin to get their systems back online, that they just couldn't override the hack. Now, a reminder here in the difference, that was healthcare providers who were dealing with, medical claims and the financial part of it. This incident, though, while smaller in scope, impacts systems with direct bearing on care, right? You're talking about diverting ambulances and nurses not being able to talk to doctors in some cases in emergency situations. And in some cases, nurses not being able to talk to doctors electronically in emergency situations. So this much more of an urgent issue than the previous hack this spring. And it really underscores the lack of resiliency right now we have when it comes to cybersecurity in the healthcare system. And one of the reasons you have an issue here is due to the fact that cybersecurity goals are all voluntary right now. The government can list a whole bunch of recommendations, but it's up to the hospitals and the companies to protect themselves. But now the voluntary nature of these measures are being debated as we're seeing hack after hack, incident after incident. Hackers now seeing a lot of money because these hospital systems are willing to pay them millions in Bitcoin to get their systems back online. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center has received 249 ransomware attacks in just the last year. That was as of March. So, already here we have a couple more attacks since March. Now, the American Hospital Association says it continues to support voluntary cybersecurity goals. They do not want to see mandatory measures. They say requirements like those proposed by the Biden administration would penalize hospitals that don't meet certain measures, even when the vulnerability comes from third-party technology. So the hospitals don't want to be to blame here. A lot of the hospitals and medical systems are using other technology. They're saying it's their fault, it's their bad cybersecurity, so don't punish us and give us mandatory things that are going to cost us money. And many people don't know this, but hospitals are not profit centers. In many cases, some of them are just breaking even or making a slight profit. Many of them are nonprofits. It's other companies like the insurance companies and other parts of the medical industry where they make much more in the way of profits. So the hospitals here say they don't have much money to spend on cybersecurity, but now we're seeing the ramifications of it on the back end, right, where you're paying the ransomware attackers. So, Jill, we wanted to make a point of doing this in the newsletter and the podcast today because this is an issue we're seeing more and more of, and it's impacting a number of you.
Time for the speed read from the CBC up in Canada. The United Nations is facing scrutiny after lowering its counts of Palestinian women and children killed since Israel began its campaign to root out Hamas from Gaza in the aftermath of the attacks on October 7th. The UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, which releases impact reports on the situation in Israel and Gaza every 2 to 3 days, revised its tallies last week to show that approximately 5,000 women and 7,800 children have been killed as of April 30th, while the overall number of those killed still stands at about 35,000. These new figures significantly reduce the number of those ID'd. The number of women and children killed are about half, less than half of what the agency had previously reported. A spokesperson for the UN Secretary General said the UN is consistently revising and cross-checking its figures. It gets numbers from Gaza's Ministry of Health or the Gaza Media Office. Both are run by Hamas and some other sources, but they are blaming the fog of war for the difficulty in being able to ascertain accurate death tolls.
So one of the issues everyone's facing in Gaza right now is that there's not much in the way of independent verification due to the fact that things are still managed on the Palestinian side by Hamas, and the only other source is the Israeli government. And the Israeli government has been criticizing the UN for relying on the statistics from the Hamas health ministry. Now, while figures from previous wars have been relatively accurate, in this war, it appears the numbers have fluctuated. And one of the critiques, one of the challenges is that Hamas doesn't differentiate between civilians and combatants. They call all deaths in Gaza civilians. And that's the key issue here. The war is a tragedy. The death toll remains above 30,000. Every loss of life when it comes to civilians is a tragedy. But given all the rhetoric and terms flying around when we're talking about death toll, terms like genocide, etc., these numbers matter. Why? Well, combatant to civilian death toll ratios have been long tracked in modern warfare. They give you a sense of what's actually going on in the war and who's being targeted. And most professional militaries seek out combatants, not civilians. They do their best to avoid civilian casualties. In the past, you might have heard the term collateral damage. They don't use that term now because, again, you're talking about human beings, and to refer to them as collateral damage. And I think that's something you heard in the Iraq war back in 2003, and I think the language has evolved since then, but you try to get a sense of what the civilian death toll is. And as of previous numbers, it appeared here the civilian death toll to the combatant death toll was about 1.5 civilians killed for every combatant in Gaza until now. Based on these newest UN numbers, it shows more of a 1-to-1 ratio here potentially, which means you're talking about 15,000 civilians killed in this war, yes, but you're also talking about 15,000 combatants killed in this war. And by modern standards, especially in urban settings, military strategists will tell you, given that you have Hamas, running tunnels underneath civilian buildings, etc., that the Israelis here, by modern standards, are doing better than some of the urban battles you saw in recent wars, even in this part of the world, in Iraq, where you would see upwards of 9 civilians killed for every combatant. And again, in this case, you're looking to 1-to-1. And we're talking about this in mathematical terms. At the end of the day, you're talking about human beings here. But I think that's why this headline got so much traction, and you've seen a lot of it potentially on social media, again, it speaks to some of the accusations that have been thrown around here. Because again, I think it speaks to some of the accusations that have been out there over the last 7 months. And I was asked, on Instagram, Jill, well, what is the actual number, Motion? I'm like, listen, I'm not in Gaza, and you have to keep in mind a couple things. One, Hamas calls everyone civilians. They also happen to have fighters under the age of 18, male teens, who they refer to as civilian children. At the same time, when the Israeli government puts its estimates together, all adult fighting age men are sometimes considered Hamas, even if they weren't fighters. So the numbers are murky here in war. And by the way, it's not just this war. You could go to other previous wars, including the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. And the numbers are all over the map, depending on whether you took the Ukrainian government, the Russian government, third-party observers, both when it comes to civilian casualties as well as combatant casualties. Now, the Israelis have received criticism from the U.S. The U.S. has said, we don't have evidence that Israel is purposely targeting civilians, but they could do a better job of, as they seek out Hamas, of avoiding civilian casualties. And that speaks to the freeze the U.S. has put on 2,000-pound bombs and other specific weaponry in recent days. So the UN makes this announcement. They say they now have confidence in the numbers they have released, but they're going to keep updating them. And again, the UN says here that there's still bodies, sadly, tragically buried under buildings they haven't gotten to yet. So they actually believe the death toll is much higher. So if you take anything away from this, just know the numbers are in flux here. This is an admission from the UN that they don't know as much as they thought they knew, and they're going to update things. But until you get, any other entity putting out these numbers, you're going to have skepticism and accusations thrown around. Either way, this is a war. Tragically, you've seen thousands of civilians die in this war. And so some people say, like, what does it matter what these numbers are? But at the same time, facts do matter. And I think that's what people are trying to get at here.
And there have even been some statisticians that have looked at the numbers that Hamas has put out, that the Gaza Health Ministry, has put out, and said they don't make a lot of sense because they are just kind of going up by just say 1,000, a week or whatever it is, not really taking into account what's happening on the ground, where there kind of was a pause in fighting for a pretty long time. And yet the death toll was just going up in that same manner. And at the same time, if you remember very early on in the war, there was a lot of confusion around one of the hospitals that was allegedly bombed by Israel, but it turned out it was actually an Islamic Jihad rocket that had misfired and landed in a hospital parking lot. And it was within minutes, really, that the Gaza Health Ministry had put out something like 500 killed. And as we learned after even the October 7th attacks in Israel, where it took them days, weeks actually to really figure out, and still they're revising it to figure out the death toll exactly. You can't figure it out so quickly. And so that's why there have been a lot of questions. And there has been some criticism of journalists for not asking harder questions and tougher questions about these death toll numbers coming out of Gaza.
Yeah, people want absolutes, and sometimes press releases will put out absolutes, but you have to look at who's putting out that information, and how quickly they got that information, and do they have an agenda behind that information, and that includes the various entities. That also includes humanitarian organizations that sometimes have their own political agendas. So this is something we'll continue to track, both here on Instagram and we'll let you know, what we learn.
Right. And as the UN said, it is likely that the numbers are going to go up by a lot because there's still people buried under the rubble.
You're talking about tens of thousands of buildings that are still, they haven't gotten to.
But the point is, we can't just be making up numbers because they do matter. All right, as we reported yesterday, Canadian wildfires are creating some very hazardous air in the United States. From the Washington Post, some of the worst air quality in the world could be found Tuesday in places like Indonesia, Qatar, Cambodia, and Kansas. The flow of Canadian wildfire smoke into the Midwest means that Kansas City, Kansas, has the distinction of having the worst air quality in the United States. According to IQ Air, code orange air quality, considered unhealthy for sensitive groups, stretches across the Midwest, including Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. As the smoke spreads southward and eastward on Monday, parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin were under air quality alerts. Moshe, I heard from a few people in Minnesota who said that the air where they were was just really thick and smoky and just not healthy.
Yeah, we heard from people in northern Iowa as well, where they have air quality alerts. Wildfire smoke can travel great distances with particulates small enough to enter the bloodstream through your lungs if inhaled. That's why they're so concerned about, ensuring when you see these warnings, stay indoors if you can. And the way that the wind and the way the jet stream works and wind blows, sometimes, ironically, the air is totally clean in Canada, but flows down into the U.S. depending on the day. So the wildfire smoke coming from Western Canada, second year in a row now that we've seen the fire season off to a very active, very early start. It is not expected to spread eastward like it did last year as of now, at least not yet. Now, the smoke is not expected to spread eastward like it did last year, like to those of you out east, Jill, on Long Island, at least. Again, it's still early, but we will monitor things. Again, that smoke last year was coming from eastern Canada, where we haven't seen much in the way of major wildfires. Yet forecast models project that some smoke will linger over the central U.S. for the next couple days, and then slowly become more dispersed.
From CNN, the trapped cargo ship Dolly will hopefully be refloated this week after authorities set off explosives at a key portion of the collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore on Monday. The charges helped demolish a portion of the bridge wreckage that was resting on the ship, and it's meant to help free the vessel nearly 7 weeks after it struck the bridge and caused the span to collapse, killing 6 construction workers.
Yeah, we posted a video of this over on our Instagram account. A chunk of the collapsed structure appeared to fall away as the explosives went off here. After necessary assessments and surveys, the plan is to then bring the ship to port gradually. They'll use some tugboats there. We should mention, this surprised some folks. The crew, the 21-person crew, still aboard the ship after all this time. They've had their phones taken away from them because of the ongoing investigation. Jill, it comes as parts of the NTSB report, the initial NTSB report, were released last night in a 24-page summary of the findings. They said that the cargo vessel experienced at least 2 electrical failures on the day before the accident, causing the crew to adjust the configuration of the electrical system just 10 hours before they set out. So they're figuring out what connection it had there, but clearly the ship here had some major issues in the hours before they decided to leave port and make their way to Sri Lanka.
All right, some business tech news again from Axios. Comcast CEO Brian Roberts announced plans at an investor conference this morning to create a new streaming bundle called Stream Saver with NBC Universal's Peacock, Netflix, and Apple TV+. Roberts didn't offer a price for the new bundle, but said it would be sold at a deep discount. Bottom line, big bundles are the next frontier for streamers who have hit a point of saturation in the United States. Verizon announced a bundle with Netflix and Starz in January.
Yeah, and that Verizon bundle also offers Max at $17 a month. Paramount has been talking to Apple and Comcast about bundling their streaming services. So, Jill, the cable package is back. The great unbundling happened, and now we have the great rebundling.
We're at max capacity, right? It's like, how many of these streamers could we possibly pay for?
Well, it's funny. At one point, you're like, you get 400 channels with your cable package. And then you're like, no, I don't need that anymore. I'm going to just get Netflix or get Disney Plus. And then at some point, you're like, well, there's Disney Plus and there's Netflix and there's Paramount and there's Peacock. Can somebody just put them all together again? Well, folks, they've heard you, and it looks like they're all getting together again with the rebundling. So we'll wait to hear what Stream Saver ends up being priced at. Walmart inked a deal with Paramount back in 2022 to offer subscribers of Walmart Plus access to the Paramount ad-supported tier. Disney has agreed to let charter cable customers access Disney Plus and ESPN Plus. It's a mess, Jill. It's very confusing, and so, some of you are probably still borrowing friends or family passwords. They're really cracking down on password sharing right now, a number of those companies. And so, within the next couple of years, there'll just be a bundle. It'll give you all the streamers again, but they'll call it something else. But really, let's call it what it is: cable.
Sticking with streaming news from Deadline, Amazon has ordered Elle, which is a Legally Blonde prequel series. It hails from the film franchise's star Reese Witherspoon and her Hello Sunshine banner. The project is being unveiled at Prime Video's inaugural upfront presentation this week. Pretty interesting that Prime is doing an upfront. Elle follows Elle Woods in high school as we learn about the life experiences that shaped her into the iconic young woman we came to know and love in the first Legally Blonde film. Curious who's going to end up playing her.
Yeah, Jill, some of the TV writers were very impressed with the Amazon Prime upfront, that they're, very into content. They're taking things seriously. They also have Reese Witherspoon and Will Ferrell doing a film that'll come out next January called You're Cordially Invited, about wedding planners. So they're putting out that comedy. I feel like comedy now is like fully, they're not even going to theaters anymore. They're just rolling out comedies on streamers these days.
Right. It's basically like theaters are for superhero movies and action films.
Yeah.
But rom-coms and anything really in the comedy arena, even just kind of stand-up comedy specials, are just going straight to streaming.
So they talked about The Summer I Turned Pretty having a new season. They also have a new Roadhouse sequel that Jake Gyllenhaal roll out. Patton Oswalt will have a game show called The 1% Club. Octavia Spencer and Hannah Waddingham have a new action-adventure series. So a lot coming to Amazon Prime. Back to the latest in Legally Blonde news, the prequel series. There have actually been 2 Legally Blonde series in the works. There's the one you mentioned. The other one is a spinoff that's produced by the folks who brought you Gossip Girl. Reese Witherspoon says in the announcement, "I truly couldn't be more excited about this series. Fans will get to know Elle Woods and how she navigated her world as a teenager with her distinct personality and ingenuity in ways that only our beloved Elle could do." So, Jill, I know you weren't a big fan of the sequels, but maybe you'll get into the prequel.
Maybe. I can't get so psyched about prequels of movies that came out 20 years ago. Like, I kind of don't care what made Elle. She was this iconic character.
Right. There was a moment you might have cared. That moment has passed.
But if I am bored enough and it's on TV, I will probably watch.
Well, rest assured, we'll look out for it. And in a Friday edition early next year, we'll tell you that we're watching.
Exactly. I'm sure I'll watch it 100 times. Okay, Moshe, as I mentioned, I asked on my Instagram account, that is Jill R. Wagner, by the way, if you guys want to follow me, for stories that people wanted us to cover on the podcast. And here's one that was not on my radar, but a bunch of people mentioned. So this story from the BBC, a sailing yacht has sunk in Moroccan waters in the Strait of Gibraltar after being rammed by an unknown number of orcas, or killer whales. 2 people on board the vessel were rescued by a passing oil tanker on Sunday. The yacht was left adrift and it eventually sank. And it is the latest in a series of orca rammings of vessels around the Strait of Gibraltar over the past 4 years. Scientists aren't really sure about the exact causes of the behavior, but believe the highly intelligent mammals could be displaying copycat or playful behavior. Orca rammings in the Strait, one of the busiest waterways in the world with approximately 300 ships crossing daily, have become increasingly common over the past 4 years.
So, Jill, I was reading a Scientific American story about this, and they say there's 2 main hypotheses regarding this behavior. One is that this is a fad, and orcas are just like humans, like things get trendy in the orca community. Apparently, back in the late 80s in the Pacific Northwest, a group of orcas there, all of them were swimming around with dead salmon on their heads. It was like a trendy thing for orcas back then. Okay, so theory one, this is a trend. They're only seeing this in the Orca group in Gibraltar. That's the explanation. The other theory here is that this stems from negative experiences that this group has had with boats, and they're seeking revenge here for some of their orca mates that have been injured by the boats. Now, the orca population is critically endangered. Migration routes have put its members in a path of many fishing, military, recreational vehicles. And so, the theory one is this is them having fun. Theory two is this is revenge. Now, researchers caution attributing malicious intent to the animals. Some science and research directors say they would never attack people or boats. And so that's the question, whether this is just them being playful or, again, the theory being that this is revenge. But again, they're cautious about this because they don't want to put off the impression, and the research they have done on orcas is that they wouldn't engage in this sort of behavior trying to actually hurt anybody. All right, now time for On This Day in History on this May 15th. I know they call it the Ides of March. I guess we're in the Ides of May on this May 15th. We're going to begin in 1928. Mickey Mouse makes his debut in a test screening of the silent film Plane Crazy. Fast forward to another icon, McDonald's. The first McDonald's fast food restaurant opened in San Bernardino, California on this day in 1940. The restaurant was founded by two brothers, Richard and Maurice McDonald. It initially focused on barbecue, but in 1948, they simplified their menu. They settled on just calling it McDonald's, and they dropped the name barbecue because it was called McDonald's Barbecue previously. Now, of course, it became iconic in 54. That's when the first franchise opened. They adopted the Golden Arches. The brothers, McDonald, actually only wanted a small number of restaurants. Others would have the big dreams for McDonald's. In 1961, Ray Kroc, you may have heard of him, he bought the company from the brothers for $2.7 million. Jill, a pretty good deal for Ray Kroc. All right, interesting political news on this day in history. In 1972, George Wallace, the segregationist former Alabama governor, was shot in an assassination attempt on this day in 1972 in Maryland. He was actually running for president again. He had run in 68, won electoral votes in 5 states, actually. So he ran again in 72. He ends up being shot multiple times. He's paralyzed from the waist down the rest of his life. And notably, you see a transition in George Wallace at this point. He was, of course, a very avowed segregationist. He wanted to keep blacks and whites separate. After this assassination attempt, he turns over a new leaf and attempts to seek forgiveness from the black community. Now, the 72 campaign, he wouldn't win in any states. He tries to run again in 76, doesn't win in any states. But it was in this period of time, Jill, where you had JFK shot, and RFK shot, and MLK shot, and Malcolm X shot, and in this case George Wallace shot, and then several attempts against Gerald Ford. A lot of assassination attempts in those in the 60s and 70s. All right, on to lighter news here. On this day in 1980, Elmo makes his first appearance on Sesame Street. And we end here with a bit of music news. On this day in 1982, Ebony and Ivory takes the top spot in the Billboard charts. Jill, it was the #1 song as I was born this week in 1982. It was the duet of Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder, the biggest hit record of Paul McCartney's post-Beatles career. And in other music news, on this day in 2008, Shania Twain, the singer, and her producer husband announced they're separating after 14 years of marriage. Now, her husband, Mutt Lange, was having an affair with Shania Twain's best friend. That triggers the split. Notably, Twain then marries the best friend's ex-husband. She's still married to him. Frederick Thibault is his name. So the husband has an affair with the best friend, and then Shania ends up with the best friend's husband. And it appears today that the only folks who are still together is Shania and the ex-best friend's ex-husband.
I guess they just married the wrong people originally.
There you go.
That's so strange. Wow. A little gossipy for it on this day, Moshe, but I will take it.
Well, those are the facts as we know it, and just thought it was an interesting historical fact on this day.
All right. We want to thank everyone for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Please follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. Every review, at least the good ones, really make a difference.
Jill, our latest review from Jules Coop on Apple. They write, the absolute best. I recommend this podcast to everyone. So thank you for that. And again, those reviews matter. The stars matter. The sharing matters. So be sure to share this with everyone you know. And check out the Mo News Interview podcast for deeper dives with a variety of compelling leaders in business, parenting, politics. We do a little bit of everything over on the Mo News Interview podcast.
All right. Bye, everybody.